Welcome to the Fully Mindful podcast. I'm your host, Melissa. I designed this podcast for you. I'm so happy you're here. We are talking about what it means to live with more intention, creativity, and authenticity so we can make aligned connections. I'm a neurodivergent lawyer turned coach who found the healing power of breathwork and the powerful impact of mindfulness as we navigate this wild and beautiful ride of life. Here at The Fully Mindful, we dive deep with inspiring guests, share solo mini-sodes that are packed with tools you can apply immediately, and I mix it up a bit with tangents and sidebars, where my friend and host of the New World Normal podcast, Debbie Harrell, joins us for some down-to-earth, sometimes random, but always meaningful conversations. If you're ready to breathe, reflect, and grow, you're in the right place. Let's get fully mindful. Well, hello, everyone. This is Melissa with The Fully Mindful. I'm honored to welcome someone whose work and deep inner journey resonates with my own. Anthony Abagnano is the founder of Alchemy of Breath, a global breathwork training school and community rooted in healing, connection, and awakening. He's also the author of a powerful book called Outer Chaos, Inner Calm, which beautifully traces his own transformation through illness, loss, life, and spiritual reckoning into a new way of being. Like many of us, I've also walked a winding path, living with trauma, a longing for belonging, and challenges of my own with neurodivergence and addiction. For me, mindfulness and breathwork has become a steady anchor and a spark of awakening. And that's why I'm so excited for this conversation. Anthony's story is about more than just personal healing, although that's powerful in and of itself. It's about how we return to ourselves, to presence, to each other through breath, awareness, curiosity. We can learn to meet the chaos around us with calm within. And from this place, create something more whole, more true, more real. So welcome, Anthony. It's so great to have you.
Wow. Thank you for such a great intro. And I love that return to ourselves. That feels grounding to hear, actually, when I hear you say that. Yes, indeed.
Good. Well, I like to start this conversation with what's most alive for you today.
Today, what's alive for me is that I love what I do so much that I could do it every waking minute. I just feel so fortunate and so grateful to be able to share from my experience and from my being, and to hopefully bring hope to people that returning home isn't so scary, and that we don't really need to go anywhere else, because wherever we go, we'll find ourselves anyway, right? So something about that, what you just said, really resonated, and it kind of like capped off my day, returning home.
Yeah, and so often, so many of us, I mean, we're on this journey, we go about our lives, we're living our lives, and there's a sense of disconnection for many of us along the way. And we can't really place our finger on it necessarily. It's just something is like, wow, I've talked to so many people like this, and I've experienced this myself, where we seem to be doing all the right things, in air quotes there. We're doing all the right things. We're checking all the boxes, and yet something's just feeling off and disconnected. And you talk about that in your book, Outer Chaos, Inner Calm, the first few pages, I started reading this and I thought, did Anthony write this for me? I had that very strange experience. Like, I've only met you once and you somehow wrote the book before we met. And that you talk about that, this feeling of disconnection that we have. How were you able to get so intimate and understand that disconnection that you could describe it so well?
Thank you. I was actually an outsider as a young boy. I was put into boarding school when I was just 8 years old. And it was a very harrowing experience for me. I didn't really understand why I'd been put away from my family. And my mother, who was Italian, was not really very Italian. She was living in England and had to become English because this was just after the war. So I didn't get a lot of nourishment from her. And then I was kind of deposited in this place. And being half Italian, I was not welcomed in those days, back in the early 60s. It was still a time of being marginalized if you weren't pure-blooded English. And so, being an outsider, I began to observe. In fact, I've run workshops before on being the outsider and what a powerful experience it can become if we can move away from that sense of damage that we experience from it and transform it into a superpower, because it really is. We're usually the ones who speak the least and see the most, and we tend to accumulate this awareness of the human condition.
Mm-hmm.
And for me, that was really important to see people. I mean, especially at boarding school, people we're not conscious as children. We're not conscious in the way that we would wish to be, perhaps. And so I saw a lot of brutal treatment myself. And there was one other kid who was Jewish. I remember him being quite persecuted as well. And this gave us the opportunity to really sit on the edge and watch and not to lose the moment, and to also understand that even these people who were kind of mean, they were just children and they didn't mean harm. It was because they were harmed themselves
Right.
that hurt other people. And that's, I think, very early for me that I understood that hurt people hurt people. And I was, because of an early breathwork experience when I was that age, I was just 8, I understood that there's got to be a better world and there's got to be a better way to manage this situation. So I was always kind of the kid who was trying to put things together. I was the youngster in my family, and I was the one who'd ask everybody to come around and talk and sit together. And I was the one that kind of, I think there's one in every family, right? There's, someone's going to take the thread and try weave it through or carry the candle for the family to gather around. And that was my role in my family as the youngster. And so I've always sought to bring togetherness and community and ease to the human condition. And I've always been fascinated to explore it and to understand why. I mean, and it was just recent history for me when I was born, the Second War, but why those behaviors occurred and how can they be forgivable? Just like the behaviors that exist today, how can they become forgivable? Because if we don't go there, if we don't go into forgiveness, then we're going to repeat it. We're going to repeat the same issues again. And so I'm really, in the book, seeking to create an alternative to that not just for our own being inside, that we can become more whole, but that we can also become an example, that by gaining our own agency, we can also help other people. So.
Yeah, thank you for that. I think that's really powerful. And a lot of the work that I try to do and that I do is about creating a sense of belonging, because really that is, I think, the antidote maybe for some of that disconnection is feeling like we truly belong for who we really are, not for the facade or the persona that we may feel like we have to put out there, but who we really are. And I mean, that's no easy task. I wanted, before we get more into your book and about that, I wanted to talk about your first breathwork experience that you alluded to earlier when you were 8. Can you tell us a little bit about that?
Yeah, it was. I also want to come back to the word belonging because it's
Mhm.
something, if we can touch on it a little bit later. But I was only 8 and I wasn't popular at school, as I said. And this boy who was, I wouldn't say a bully, but he'd never really treated me very well, came up to me and said, "Hey, do you want to do an experiment? Why don't you breathe into this bag?" And I was kind of craving someone's acceptance. So I said, yeah, okay. I thought, okay, I'll go for it. And so he had me breathe into a paper bag, 20 very big, deep breaths. And then he came behind me and said, okay, now exhale. He squeezed my chest from behind and then let me down to the ground, fortunately, very gently. And my experience, I think it was my first spiritual it was my first real spiritual awakening to understand the suffering that I'd felt that I was in, because I used to cry myself to sleep every night. But to understand those feelings of loneliness and not belonging were nothing in comparison to the magnificence of that experience. I suppose could be compared to a near-death experience as we see them reported today, like an instant knowing and an instant sense of grace and peace, and the question and the answer becoming the same thing, that they kind of like wash each other and bathe each other, and a real arrival at a deep inner peace. And I think from that point on, I knew that that was possible. And it was there sometimes, and it wasn't at others. But my coming home, my returning home that you mentioned earlier, has always been about that still point, the still point from which anything can become possible. And I think paradoxically, that still point also includes the state of confusion or learning to be in the unknown, which we see, when we say to someone we're confused, it's an admission of some defeat. Usually it indicates, oh, I can't figure things out. But that's actually such a powerful place to be, to accept that I can't figure this out. I'm just going to sit here and be an outsider to this experience and witness it and be curious and become the detective of it. And then something will become apparent. So I think that's what it taught me. It taught me where home base was, that it wasn't in a successful relationship with a bully or becoming his victim. It was really something much, much broader. And I think since then I've understood that, and one of the things I teach, it doesn't matter what one would call their higher power, the God of their understanding, but my own experience says that if we don't believe in a higher power, then that higher power cannot help us. And so, what if there's something, there's somebody, there's some entity, there's some benign force that's just waiting for us to awaken to it in order for it to be able to play through us.
I really like that. There's so many things in what you just said. I was thinking about, very interesting that a person who was not a child, who was not very nice to you, kind of gave you that gift, and how interesting that is, that it came from that person, this experience. I mean, of course, it was something you experienced internally, but unbeknownst to this child who, whatever he thought he was doing, I'm sure he didn't think he was giving you this experience, right? This spiritual experience. So that's interesting. And I too was a bit of an outsider when I was a child, and somehow what you were relating was reminding me of my first, I don't know if it was a breathwork experience or a mindfulness experience, but we had this enormous tree in our backyard. We were living in Pennsylvania, and we had this giant tree, or at least that's how I remember it. And I remember climbing it and kind of having this sense that I probably shouldn't be climbing this. I had very pronounced ADHD when I was a child, but I had no impulse control. And so I ended up climbing this tree very, very high. And I thought, I don't know how to get back down. But in that moment, it was okay. I was getting a perspective that very few people probably had from that tree, from that high up, and certainly that I had never had. This experience of being truly present and seeing things for what they were. And it was in nature. And so I love that your experience was also unexpected and, led to this different way of being. And I think my climbing tree experience, and I somehow have this recollection, I think, of the fire department having to be called, but it was a beautiful experience for me, right? Yeah. To breathe heavy, work hard, climb a tree, get perspective. And in that moment, getting back to this idea of belonging, I can say that I felt like I belonged right there in that moment, even though there were no other people around. I just felt like I belonged, which was a very unusual feeling for me as an awkward young child. Yeah. So this idea, oh, sorry, go ahead.
No, that's exactly what my feeling was at that point, that I belonged, notwithstanding what any human might tell me.
Right.
that I belonged.
And what a powerful experience, right? Because for whatever reason, whether it was your experience because you were living as an Italian child in England and, or if it was the boarding school or all those things combined, it probably was not a very common experience for you and until that moment to feel like I belong.
Yeah, that's right.
Yeah. So, and it's fascinating. And you talk quite a bit about trauma in your book, Outer Chaos, Inner Calm. So, what do you think the role is of trauma and disconnection and coming back home?
Let's take a quick break.
Hey, everybody, this is Melissa with The Fully Mindful. Have you been curious about the power of the breath? Join me for in-person or online breathwork sessions in the new year. We have themes such as awaken, reset and manifest, love and kindness, empower and energize, and more. We'll use conscious connected breathwork for truly transformational sessions with curated music and somatic coaching. Visit the website at thefullymindful.com for detailed information on upcoming sessions. Fulfill your need for personal development and breathe into the new year with purpose and intention. See you there.
Well, at best, trauma is our teacher,
Mm.
but it takes us quite a while to accept that. The big T word is enough to make us tremble in our boots a little bit. There's so much more that we know about trauma now than we used to 10 or 20 or 30 or 50 years ago. I remember reading a trilogy by Pat Barker, I think it was called Remembrance or something, I can't remember, but it's a book about the First World War and a beautiful book that talks about what people were going through in the war and how they used to deal with trauma in those days. Thank goodness we've moved a long, long way from there. We've moved through a period where you had to confront your trauma to get strong. And then we got to a place where we understood that actually confronting your trauma embeds it further.
Mm-hmm.
And every time we're triggered and it's reawakened, it actually becomes more normal for us to be reawakened that way into the trauma. And now we're at a stage of understanding that there are ways that we can not just manage our trauma, but also find resolution with our trauma that are unfortunately not yet mainstream, but are functional and actually work. And it's now possible to achieve this resolution without having to relive or revisit the trauma as well. And I think the breath is particularly helpful with that. I think just to quantify a little bit what I mean when I say the breath, because my wife tells me when I put in posts or emails and I say the breath, she says, people don't know what that means.
Yeah.
I want to just rewind a little bit and explain or I can't possibly explain it. I'm a student of the breath, but I can hopefully convey some sense of proportion. My own belief as someone who's worked with the breath since I was a youngster is that one breath, the contemplation of one inhale and one exhale, is worthy of more than a lifetime of reflection and study. That's how big it is. When you think of the different elements that are involved in one breath, for example, argon is something that never disappears, and we all breathe it in and out, and we're all breathing the argon that's come from someone else. So this concept that we have, which is relatively new in the Western world of oneness, is actually true in the sense that we're all breathing the same air. We're all actually breathing the same ingredient. So that would mean that we're breathing the same ingredient that the Buddha breathed, or Jesus Christ, or Muhammad breathed, but also the same air that Hitler breathed, or Mussolini did, or a mass murderer. There's a connection between all of us, and I think that part of my work is helping people understand that it's okay. That's okay. That it's perhaps a doorway to us being able to accept that the things that we need to keep hidden, the things that we feel shame about, don't actually belong to us. We don't have a monopoly on this thing. It belongs to all of us. And that sometimes we wear other people's shame unconsciously. Indeed, ancestral trauma is a perfect example of that, or the pain body that Eckhart Tolle speaks of, that can be a national pain body or a cultural pain body. It's not trauma that we've been subjected to directly, but it still has a very strong effect on us. And so, having somewhat described this history of trauma discovery, I would say that it feels like we haven't even reached the dawn of what we're going to find out about trauma. But what we do know is more and more we discover how much it informs our lives. And so to look at how we've tried to cope with it in the past is not where I feel we're going to find the right answers to resolve it, because I see that we settle, we cope with trauma, we keep calm and we carry on, like you see on t-shirts. And
Yeah.
you can't, a brittle sense of calmness is not really calm. It's a dissociation from over-identification, which, if that's conscious, that's a good thing. But if it's automatic and unconscious, we're trying to dodge the bullet, but the bullet will eventually find us. So my work with trauma is really about not settling for coping mechanisms, but to actually look at the coping mechanisms. And when they were born, which would have been the point of trauma, and not so much focus on the trauma as focus on that part of who we are that got traumatized, got frozen in that moment. So I do a lot of inner child work, retrieval, and a lot of shadow work to help us understand that the person who's going to resolve the problem that occurred to us, the person who's going to resolve the trauma, is not the perpetrator. We can't look to the perpetrator even if they say sorry and we forgive them, that doesn't resolve the trauma. We actually need to move into the role of our own caretaker in order to be able to give the reassurance that that part of us needs to reunite with who we are. And so, in a world that takes pills and finds habits and addictions and ways of coping, I really stand for accepting that as a temporary possibility. It's not that I put it down in any way. My goodness, it helped us at the time.
Right.
But what seems to historically happen is we keep using the same system. So that's why addiction develops, is because one of the reasons is because we keep relying on that system to find the sense of connection we lost or some kind of relief. And I'm really what I do with alchemy and in the book is speak more of holding out for the resolution. I guess for people who are curious, like, what do you mean relief and resolution? I think the distinction, I have a sweet little example that I can use to help distinguish. If you know, any of you are musical, or if you understand the sense of an octave is 8 notes, and the first note and the 8th note are actually the same note, but one is 1 octave higher than the other. So there are 7 notes, and then the first note gets repeated. So an octave might be do, re, mi, fa, sol, la, ti, do, which is how the Latins sing it. But if I was to go do, re, mi, fa, sol, la, ti, and now we're all in this state of and what's going to happen next? It's like suspense. It's not comfortable. And now we can now the cells can settle a little bit. And that's a really, really important moment to develop the robustness and the strength to explore. And I'm using the music as a metaphor, but we know what that's like in life. We also know that it exists in every story, even every commercial. There's an arc of interest where things reach a peak and there's a moment of suspense, and then there's a moment of resolution. It happens in music all the time, modern music, every kind of music, except perhaps for some abstract jazz, which you're always waiting for that moment of resolution, and they keep playing with it and pushing it away. And so it can be quite frustrating for some people to listen to jazz because it doesn't wrap up with a ribbon at the end of it sometimes. But it's in that little piece of unknown there, and that where the confusion lies. And has been said that where there's the most confusion, there's the most possibility. So I think it was Dan Siegel that said that. So if we can learn to make that our point of discovery, then we begin to develop this robustness just by being willing to stay in that unknown.
Mm-hmm.
That then the next time it happens, it's more welcome. And the next time it happens, then it's not just more welcome, but it becomes a sign like, oh, something very different can happen here. This is like a fulcrum, like a pivotal moment that not a great deal of effort is required to understand things in a very different way. And the breath, using breathing practices, is, to me, the most effective way to reach that pinnacle where you can pivot and you can change direction and change your understanding. I've always found breath to be the most vivid and practical and cheap way. And we don't have to buy anything, take anything, pretend anything. It's just a very grounding experience. And we often use the term coming home through breath work. There's a sense of restoration because this period of discovery does conclude with a sense of resolution.
Yeah, there's so much in what you said. Of course, I was thinking about the collective trauma that we have as a culture, as a society, and the intergenerational trauma and how we cope with that. Like you said, our coping mechanisms. I appreciate that you have clarified that they make sense in the moment, right? Gabor Mate talks about it. Certainly 12-step folks talk about alcohol or other substances or behaviors, doesn't matter what it is, as a solution in the moment, right? It's the solution in the moment until it stops working as a solution, right? And we need to look to something else, something deeper, to find our way out of that disconnection and that trauma, whatever that trauma experience is, whether it's our own or the collective intergenerational trauma. And I love that you're able to tap into the breath in order to, as one of the tools for the deeper tool to uncover, and like you said, go into the confusion a bit to uncover what's really there. And so can you say a little bit more about how the breath helps us, I guess, access that confusion and come out through the other side?
Yeah, I can say masses. How many years do you have? I mean, this is my life, so I still feel like I've discovered a tiny percentage of how much the breath can really do. But there are several ways in which the breath helps. Perhaps the biggest and easiest takeaway is the ability to remember to breathe.
Mm.
It's actually more important than the breath itself, or at least half as important as what happens when you breathe. So it's half of the work is in a situation that might trouble you to lean into your breath, to learn to use your breath. In fact, I have one of my students said he saw emotional intelligence being the ability to take a breath when you don't want to.
Mm.
Remember all of those times that you've been upset. You're in the supermarket queue and there's some old fella in front of you that's digging in his purse for 3 cents and you're in a hurry and you're late for an appointment. He can't quite see them properly and you're impatient, and that's a good time to take a breath. Good time to use a breath practice. That's a little tiny easy example, but we know that there are some horrifying examples too in which we would lose our breath. And of course, losing our breath is what leads us to panic. So emotional resilience, emotional intelligence, let us see if we can accept that is demonstrated by the ability to choose to breathe. Choose is a very important word because when we're traumatized, we lose our choice. So if there was a ledger of your psyche for all the times that you unconsciously lost your breath because of the impact of an outer event, what about we balance it out with each time that we choose our breath as a way of creating some kind of balance in this lopsided equation? And then it becomes, okay, well, how and what does that mean? And how do I begin? Give me 3 takeaways, give me 5 steps that I can use in order to change things for myself. Well, first of all, the outcome is to be able to change everything, not just one thing, but everything.
Mhm.
Not just what happens in your life, but also the way you perceive what happens in your life can be changed with your breath. And the initial stage is to notice what you're doing now. Are you breathing now as you hear this? How are you breathing now? To sort of make that inner commitment, like, okay, I'm going to become a student of the
Mhm.
breath. And that means that you would, if you're super keen, have some kind of a notebook or way of memorizing. Oh, when I'm driving, I tend to sort of have short, choppy breaths. Or if someone cuts in front of me when I'm driving, then I lose my breath. Or when I'm making love, I'm noticing this is how I breathe at what point in the experience. Or if I'm angry, how am I breathing? Or if I'm really feeling good after a delicious, healthy meal, how am I feeling? Or when I'm feeling love and strong emotion, how am I breathing? All of these are opportunities to begin to create a little catalog of how we breathe. And the reason it's worth doing this is twofold. One is because we're developing acquaintance and eventually intimacy with the way we breathe. And the second, which is, I think, amazing, is that if you repeat that breath at another time, you can recreate that condition. So as you develop this catalog, let's say you find when you're excited and enthusiastic that you're breathing a strong, powerful breath. And if you're feeling lackadaisical and tired and exhausted, you're just like half breathing in the bottom register of your breath, and you're not really using your lungs at all. Well, guess what? If you're feeling tired and useless and you want to upgrade a little bit and get some activity going, then you're going to breathe the same kind of breath that you did when you were enthusiastic, and you will become enthusiastic.
Mhm.
The body can inform the brain. It's not just the other way around. In fact, using also the vagus nerve, which is some people call the well-being nerve, the amount of data that travels from the body to the brain is 5 times the amount of data that goes from the brain to the body. We just haven't learned to listen to it.
Mhm.
So this journey now, we begin to get some idea of the proportion. Like, my God, there's like 4/5 of my human experience I'm not I'm not paying attention to. I'm thinking that the brain is dominant and the brain is what makes everything work and the brain's what gets all the credit and the blame. But actually, there's a whole body that's thinking too. And thanks to Bruce Lipton, we know that each cell in our body has intelligence.
Mhm.
So what would it take to awaken to that source of intelligence? So that's the kind of scope that we're talking about. And then the next stage, once we begin to play with the breath this way, and we can make up all kinds of different breath patterns. I mean, most breath workers do, and some people, like Wim Hof, for example, names it after himself. He calls it the Wim Hof breath. And he's had great success with that. But really, anybody could do that. That's actually an ancient Tibetan technique that's borrowed and very successfully got out in the world. And I'm super grateful because more and more people are becoming aware of how powerful it can be. So you can make up your own breaths, remembering, first of all, step one is remembering. That's half the job. And then any breath pattern you use after that will have the effect that you want it to have. Now, so those are general daily breath practices we can create. And then there's what we call the conscious connected breath, which is a breath pattern that is consistent and we never actually pause. So at the top of my inhale, we exhale smoothly, connectedly, and then just before I get to the bottom of my exhalation, then I bring in my next inhale. And that's a very powerful, dynamic breath, and it's one that historically has been kept secret
Mhm.
for millennia, both in the Sufi tradition and the Indian tradition. Well, the Sufi not millennia, but several hundred years, and the Indian tradition, and many indigenous
Mhm.
traditions in Indonesia, and most of the indigenous races were aware of the power of the breath. And indeed, we are in our world too. The Bible mentions the breath 43 different times, and it's always in reference to its supernatural power. The Quran refers to the breath several times. I think it's 3 or 7, I can't remember. One of them is that Muhammad was born by virtue of the breath upon his mother's chest, divine breath upon his mother's chest. So we've always understood in somewhere out there that this has a power that's beyond the human brain. There's something different. There's something supernatural about this. And when we breathe the conscious connected breath, we engage in a communication with this greater power.
Mm-hmm.
And if we give it it's conscious connected. So if we give it our consciousness and our awareness, and we address our subconscious, our traumatized selves, with an openness and not a neediness or an expectation, but an open quality of attention, then it's as if we kind of find ourselves in the ray of the divine or cosmic code, or whatever you would like to call it, that aligns itself with our conscious mind and also with our subconscious mind. And it's as if a bolt of lightning is coming through us, and our subconscious gets reinformed. And there are, practically speaking, very few ways for the subconscious to be reinformed. It sort of fills by the time we're 7 or 8, and then it just rinses and repeats as we go through life, right? So this is one way, including the act of repetition, which is another way that we can reinform the subconscious. So that repeated choice to breathe in with will, to breathe out and release, surrender, breathe in with will, breathe out with surrender, and then placing ourselves in a state of unconditional attention allows what people call miracles to happen.
Yeah, I've had many students who have practiced with me conscious connected breath talk about it as a spiritual experience, although others just say, hey, that felt great. And, I needed to release what I needed to release, and they go on with their lives. I've certainly had more of the spiritual experience. And in fact, that's why I started doing this work, the conscious connected breath work. I was very skeptical. I'm a lawyer by trade, and I think I probably have been skeptical from my own trauma. And so, but also open-minded, skeptical, but open-minded. And I think the first time I tried conscious connected breath, I was really blown away by the experience that I had. And I remember the teacher, he was a funny, whimsical guy. And he said something like, there might be people crying next to you, don't worry about it. And I thought, who's going to cry, right? Just from breathing? What? And lo and behold, at the end, I hadn't realized I was crying, but I must have touched my face and it was wet. And I thought, oh, okay. Something internal shifted in me. And I think that's what you're talking about, that sort of reshifting of the subconscious, that rewiring that is so important that we do, because otherwise it is rinse and repeat. And that's why people are baffled, why they're still where they've been 5 years ago, 10 years ago, 20 years ago, 40, 50 years ago. Why am I still here? Because our subconscious is wired a certain way, and we haven't done anything, because it is otherwise really hard to shift it, because we're trying to change our minds with our own minds. And it's really, really challenging to do. So when we invite the breath, basically like 4/5 of what we're doing is in our body, and the other 5th is in our brain. And yet we spend most of our waking hours in our heads. So I love that you've connected it back to the body, and that it's this, and I think you talk about it in the book this way, as this hero's journey that we're going through. And we can do that even within one conscious connected breath session. We can go through the entire arc of the hero's journey and feel complete at the end if guided well. And I think that's such a beautiful, beautiful thing. And whether or not, I wanted to go back and talk about this for a moment. We talk about trauma. And I think there are some people who are listening to this who are thinking, well, I haven't experienced any trauma. I had a really great childhood. I had a privileged life. My parents loved me. All the things went well. And so, what would you say to these folks about trauma?
Well, I want to be very delicate because I want to respect, first of all, this is from a position of really respecting people's experience. Sometimes things for people might be better left untouched. I don't want to pry people open, but my experience is mostly that the people who say they haven't had trauma are sufficiently dissociated from it, not to understand really what it is. One of the things when I train my facilitators of breathwork, one of the things we do is we study our own lives. It starts with studying our own life. And that's really what the book is about, is the essence of our facilitator training, of studying our own life and picking out the things that have really worked and are functional, and also identifying those constriction points, the points in our lives that were traumatic and that have dictated the way that we behave, the way that we meet the world today. This goes through 7-year periods, from 7 years before you're born to the age you are now, particularly the one around birth. I think we have this is information that's been collated since 1972. I have 8 pages of small print of different conditions during just the birth, not even the pregnancy, not even what the intention was around the conception. Was it a loving, conscious conception, or was it rape, or anywhere in between? But just the birth itself, 8 pages of little lines of cesarean means this, delayed birth means this, twins means this, death of a twin in the womb means this. And it goes on and on and on. And it also includes a perfectly normal breath. A perfectly normal birth. And a perfectly normal birth can actually cause significant issues for people later in life. Like, I'm unexceptional. I'm not worthy because it's all too easy. I've never had to fight in my life, so I don't have ambition or initiative. So it's not just trauma, it's events. And, then it just becomes a question, well, what do we call trauma and what do we call normal? For those that are men, circumcision in my day was done without anesthetic because the baby won't feel anything and it'll be over in a minute and a half. These they were considered normal, but now they'd be considered to be, hopefully, abusive. So I think we need to understand, or I would invite people to understand that even if we feel like we're not traumatized, we have been traumatized. I mean, is it not traumatizing to see children damaged by war? Is that not traumatizing? Is it not traumatizing to hear someone talk of their own trauma? Is it not traumatizing to see an accident on the side of the road? Is it not traumatizing to see someone in any degree of suffering? Something is happening inside us. Something is resonating with us deeply. So and I've countless other times that I've heard people say that and then taken them into a breath session and something quite wonderful happens, that they begin to open to an understanding that, okay, yes, it was perfect. My memory was that it was perfect, but maybe there are still influences in my life that have contained me or controlled me, or that I've developed coping systems for that are frankly out of date. Because I worked it out when I was 4 years old, that's the way to deal with it when my dad comes to the table and is grumpy at the dinner table when I'm 4. So I start whining, and now I find myself whining when men are aggressive, instead of owning my power. So, whatever those conditions might be, that we can go back and rewrite them. And I think that's the whole point. I mean, there's an invitation at the end of my book. And I keep telling this all to my friends as well. Write your own book. Because in the act of writing your own book, you take stock in a way that you just don't do in your life. And part of this journey with Outer Chaos, Inner Calm is to be invited to write your own autobiography. And invariably, when I have my students do this, I kind of have to fool them into it. And I say, look, we only need 50 words for every 7 years. And we'll start with 7 years before you were born and then go up to the age you are now. And so they sort of laugh and they think, okay, that'll take 10 minutes. But they begin, and then they begin to remember things that they hadn't remembered. And then they get curious and ask mum and dad or a sibling or a friend from school, how was it? How did I behave when I was around girls? If they were a little boy, or the other way around. They start to become the detective of their own experience and accumulate so much information. Then it's like, oh my gosh, I've got a whole new jigsaw of my life on the table, and I can't wait to put it together, because I don't need to have that piece. I can actually put another one in there instead and begin to become the author of my life. So I think by becoming the author of your own book, you claim authorship over your own life. That makes you the authority of your own life. And it doesn't matter whether the book is good or bad or has nothing to do with it. The point is to go through the agony or the process of, like, oh God, will someone read this? What will it look like? What will it? But to persevere, to prevail, and come out the other side of it. Give birth to yourself in a whole new way.
Gosh, that's so fascinating. I've been involved in 12-step for 30 some odd years. One of the tools that they do use in 12-step is called the 4th-step, which is an inventory, right? So you take stock of your life. It's a little bit different. I kind of like your way of doing things a little bit more. I think it's a bit more, the 4th-step can feel, I don't know that it necessarily was intended to be, but it can feel shame-inducing for some of us. Whereas this is truly what you've contemplated, what you've suggested, what you've invited us to do in your book and in your work, is to become a detective of your own life and to discover, right? To get curious about how were things 7 years before we were even born?
Yeah.
And that's fascinating, right? Has anyone, do people really think about this on a daily basis? Probably not. And then to think about their lives in these 7-year increments, to discover, to come back again to who we really are and make these choices about, to see things. I think in a way, I mentioned my tree experience. It's kind of like being up in the tree and seeing everything and below for the first time. And making a decision, a choice, coming back to your idea of choice and having agency and authorship of our own lives is such a beautiful experience. I'm looking forward to engaging in that project. Obviously read a bit about it, read it in your book, and then I thought, okay, I guess this is the invitation to do this work. And I hope the listeners here will do that as well. And is there anything else that you would like people to know about this process of discovery or way to do this? I guess I'm coming back to this idea of belonging and community, because that seems to be very important to your work and your invitation. Is how do we do this? Obviously, the work, we have to write our books, our autobiographies on our own, but how do we make this more of a communal process, a connection process? How do we do this together?
Well, I have an answer to that. I'm really glad you asked that question, because I think it's fundamental to making it work, to making this take hold and actually be able to create the sense of agency that we want to have. And it's to do with the belonging that you spoke of, we've spoken of all along. What I've done in the introduction of the book, there's a little QR code, and the idea is you click on that QR code and you join a forum of other people that are reading the book as well. Mm-hmm. And I've done that because that's what we do in our classes. I think, shame is such a lonely thing, and admitting that we are less than we hoped other people would think we are is also a notion that we can really only discard if we share and we understand, oh, we're all the same. We've all got the same things going on for us. So I think the element of community is really fundamental. And I've seen that in my classes. I've seen in when I teach people, take them through this journey and through the facilitated training, that actually I teach less and less. It's they that teach each other. Mm-hmm. And so it's in this community that you develop a boldness and a braveness, because you understand other people are experiencing the same thing. And you also have the chance, by virtue of your own journey yourself and sharing it with other people, to actually become an inspiration for someone else.
Mm-hmm.
So if there's a hidden agenda in this book, from my perspective, it's if I can support you gaining agency in your life, then you will end up naturally supporting someone else gaining agency in their life too, because your sense of agency will be an inspiration. So then we begin to learn not like I used to at school, which was like content delivery, and if you don't get it right in the exam, I'd get beaten if I didn't perform well in my exams. So there's no fear base here. This is meant to be fun and a journey of discovery together. And I really believe that without the acknowledgement, and I think this is a strong theme in the book, without acknowledgement and without celebration, we really can't get traction. We'll default back to our self-judgment so quickly. And that's why when you mention the fourth step, I think it's so important we're gentle with this work. This is not about, this is about divesting ourselves of that burden that we carry that we're most needing to hide.
Mm-hmm.
And understanding that when we do it together and when we see someone else do it, it makes us feel safer to do it ourselves. So that community aspect to me is really, really, really not just significant, but crucial. And the belonging was just like a little take on the book, a little double click. I think, when you look at the word belonging, it has belonging in there, right? To be in a state of longing.
Mm-hmm.
And being in a state of longing is a good thing. It's not a bad thing. It's also a good thing, like in that seventh to eighth note of the octave, because it's uncomfortable to be in a state of longing at first, but it's really worthy of exploration. So we begin to learn that our feelings are not our enemy.
Mm.
They're actually some things that pass through. They have a shelf life. They're like clouds in the sky. But we begin to see how much we want to stop them flowing. And that's usually because of fear or shyness or embarrassment or self-judgment. But once we allow those feelings to flow, there's so much richness in understanding more of who we are and then being able to express to other people who we are more honestly without having to construct some kind of a smart sentence or a winning statement or anything that's not who we really are. So the game here is the game of presence, of coming to a point where I can be sitting in front of you naked and be okay, because that's just who I am. That's how I was made, and that's who I am. And so what would that mean? I'm not necessarily talking about going to the sweat lodge and stripping off. I'm talking about psychically naked, just honest and frank as to who I am and what are the things I fear and what are the things I love, and like you would with your very best friend.
Okay.
So that belonging, to me, it's that moment of suspense of being in a state of longing and recognizing that I'm in a state of longing is empowering, because it's going to stop me doing things because my need to belong is beyond my capability to witness it.
Mm-hmm.
If my need to belong is beyond my ability to witness it, I'm going to make myself belong to things like cults, belief systems, alcohol, trends, fashions, peer pressure. All of these things are all signs of losing agency, signs of losing my traction. So when we want to belong, that if we can not just rush to satisfy the need, but to stay in the need and become the detective of that experience, that's really a little sort of view into the work that I do. And that's very much the tone of the book, is that these things that we're accustomed to skipping over in life are really worth opening up. As if we can open up that moment, then there's just so much that's passed us by in the past that we can learn from.
I could talk with you forever. I'm mindful of your time, but maybe one or two final questions here. If a listener is kind of at the edge of their own transformation, or they just feel somehow they're at the edge of something, maybe uncertain, what would you want them to hear right now?
What would it be like for all of you to be welcome here?
Mm.
Would you be willing to take a breath? And that would be my question.
Yeah, I love that. Well, if people are interested in your book and your, no pun intended, or perhaps intended, your breadth of work here, how will they find you?
Well, the book isn't yet released, but here it is. It is in hard copy, and it will be released in June. You'll find it in all the usual channels, Amazon, and you can also write to us and get it. You can also find out more about us and the book on Alchemy of Breath at alchemyofbreath.com. We are Alchemy of Breath on Instagram as well. And there's lots of other things that are happening too. We do free breathworks every Sunday. We call it Breathe the World. So we breathe the Southern Hemisphere during the morning on Sunday and then the Northern Hemisphere during the evening.
On the West Coast of the United States, I can tell you, you can do it at 9 a.m.
Yeah, thank you. That's much, much clearer. Thank you. And you breathe with several hundred people. So we really get an idea of group, how we can redo group think.
Yeah.
we come and breathe together, we can rewrite what groupthink means.
Yeah, I love that. And I really do want to invite you back because there's so much we didn't get to talk about that I wanted to talk about. And you have a really fascinating life and work that you continue to do. And I love that you talk about yourself as a student of breath. For someone with your vast experience, that's really refreshing to hear. And I want to thank you very much for being open about your own journey and continuing your work and helping us navigate our own chaos as well as the chaos of the world. And I highly recommend, I've gotten the opportunity to read your book and I'm grateful for that up front. And so in June, when it is available everywhere, I really hope people will pick it up. I think it will be a very transformative experience, as well as checking out those Sunday morning, afternoon, or evening, wherever you are in the world. Breathing experience was really a beautiful offering that you do this for free. Thank you so much for your openness, your kindness, your generosity, and the work that you do.
Well, thank you, Melissa. It's been a pleasure. You're one of the easiest people to talk to in the world. I'm sure you have a lot of people, or to speak with in the world. I'm sure you have a lot of people tell you that. But I look forward to a day we can sit in front of a fire and have a longer chat.
I'm looking forward to that. Thank you.
All right. Blessings. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you for joining me on the Fully Mindful podcast. If you got value from this episode, I'd love for you to subscribe, leave a review, or share this episode with someone who loved this content too. Remember, small moments of mindfulness can lead to big changes in your day-to-day life. Until next time, take a deep breath, stay present, and tap into your own mindfulness. I'll see you next week.